Thinking about all the lineup changes got me thinking about how cursed this band is. So, I talked a little bit about it in the past video, but in recording Emanate, I took those demos to a recording studio. The engineer, Nick, who was super into it, I don't think he knew what he was taking on at the time, but he was like very amped up about the project. He kind of talked me out of doing what became Dispassion, probably for the best. Not good. They both sucked. Whatever. At the same time, I was trying to get a full band together to actually do something. Like the early stages of Design Abstract, I was like full band. And it was kind of bonkers too, because I was in school at the time, but I was also taking a job that was about 2 hours away, which is also, if you like triangulate it, it's like my school and my job were over 2 hours away. My job and my like home, like my parents' home, where all my recording shit was like an hour and a half away. And then that was like an hour away from my school. That was like I did a lot of driving. And at the time, I was trying to get a band together. So in the early days, like I mentioned in the last video, we had Greg on drums. At the time, we had Kyle on bass. We had Eric on guitar, and then that's also shortly after that was when I met Logan. Eric was actually there first, and then we had Nina on vocals. Yeah, Logan wasn't in the picture yet, or no, I don't think so. So I'm jamming these songs out, but then at the same time, on weekends I'm booked into this like actual recording studio. Again, it cost me like, I don't know, it was like $2,600 or $3,600 to record Emanate. It was a lot of money. So Emanate was the first album that was fucking cursed. So we start out like, yeah, Greg records two of the songs, and then he's like, look, I'm not really feeling this. He didn't like Metropolis because of like the super weird counting. It like fucked him up. And he's like, no. And like Expedition and Lotus, he's like, no, I'm out. I'm like, okay. Luckily, I can play drums. But then the bassist, Kyle, was like, I go where he goes, so I'm out as well. I'm like, okay, fine. I don't really play bass at all ever, but we'll give it a try. Eric was a different story. Eric, first of all, wanted to put a whole bunch of solos where there weren't solos, and I was like, no, this album doesn't. This album has like one lead in it. The whole album. It's not what it's about, because as you might notice, there's 25 fucking layers of like orchestra stuff, and those are the leads. And so is like, okay, well, you do rhythm guitar, and that's when we learned that shredding is not the same as rhythm guitar. And he, no shade, I'm not trying to be an asshole, he couldn't play it to a click, like just couldn't, like the Metropolis breakdown and shit, just no. So he was off the album. This was before I met Logan. So suddenly I don't have a guitarist, a bassist, or a drummer. And then after all the lead vocals were done, Nina left and refused to finish the album. So it went down to just me. So I ended up just getting my shit together. Tracking guitars was fucking rough, man. Like, I did not play guitar at the time. So like Expedition, I specifically remember I could do those chugs that didn't, but I could only do them on open. So when that chord changed, I just went up a string and tuned that guitar to F. Like, because I couldn't fucking play it. For the bass, there was like this crazy slap part that I ended up getting Raph to do For the Kids. Well, now I say For the Kids fame, of Linebeck fame, the one who's actually famous. He did the fucking super cool like slapping stuff on Lotus. But I did everything else, and then I think way later on, finishing touches of the album, I had just met Logan, and I'm pretty sure he did like a little lead in Emanate. I'm pretty sure he had like a little shootly. I think that was him. I don't even fucking remember. Yeah, so like I try to record Emanate, everyone fucking leaves. Or I low-key fire them, one or the other. So that's all fine. I mean, it's cursed as fuck, but what are you gonna do? Technotheism. Technotheism is arguably worse, but for different reasons. Technotheism is also very cursed. It's so cursed I can't even talk. The album started, I believe, in 2017. The crazy thing about the overlap of this shit is like, okay, well, I was working up north, commuting to record Emanate. At that point, like, Corrupt was pretty much done. I think, I don't know, the timeline's so fucked up. Like, when I was working up north is when I first conceived of the idea of technotheism, the album, like the concept. Yeah. So at the time when I first started writing technotheism, and there's a fun overlap there of soliloquy too. I just got sick of like techie symphonic metal and just like wrote soliloquy and recorded that and spent a shit ton of money recording that. And then nobody wanted to do vocals on it. And finally, Villa did the vocals on it. That was weird and cost a lot of money. For now, all it does is just haunt me on Spotify because it always gets way more plays than the current Voicide stuff. Anyway, so I started writing technotheism. I was living alone. Well, I was living in an attic apartment, which was fucking awesome. Basically, at that point, I had more or less dropped out of school. I was rarely sleeping. I would usually go to bed at around 10 a.m. and then wake up at like 2 or 3, right? I'm sure I've talked about this. And I was just having like, just living off coffee. That was it. And I was writing all of the like core technotheism songs. I was writing Deus Est. I was writing Data Shield Attack. Apotheosis came earlier because I remember I sent Logan Apotheosis. I had a super early demo of Apotheosis, and that was one of the songs that I was like, hey, I want a guitarist for my band. Because after everyone left, it was like, look, I can do this, but I would really, really like to at least work with one other person. You know, it's lonely at the top, or whatever they say. Really, it's lonely at the bottom because nobody wants to associate with you. So I put out on Kijiji, which if you're American is like Craigslist, but Canadian, and owned by eBay, weirdly. Just, yeah, for a guitarist. And 2 people responded. The one guy was like 100% on the vibe, industrial, symphonic, sci-fi type shit, and just sloppy as all fuck. And then the other one was Logan. At the time, it was like, okay, scoring not usually there. More or less, it's usually just guitar, and it's like really upbeat. But like the playing, holy shit! Like the playing is so ridiculously solid. And so, you know, we all know how history played out in that sense. Anyway, so I'm living in my solo apartment where I only leave to get more coffee. And I'm just like ripping through all these crazy songs, which to me is like the most ridiculous and technical shit that I've ever written. Like Deus Est at the time was fucking nuts. And I guess it still is, but at the time it was like, Jesus fucking Christ. That's the type of music I always wanted to write. Like Emanate sounds the way it does because I just couldn't play death metal. I listened to it, but I didn't know how to do it because I didn't play guitar. And like I had started playing a bit of guitar. Like I got my student loans and immediately bought this fucking awesome fan fret Ibanez, like an ash body. It's such a cool guitar. That's like what I wrote Deus Est on and a bunch of other shit. And that's just, it was just isolation and not sleeping and like severe emotional trauma. And that was those songs. And at that time, Logan was in the band. We had a group chat, okay? Logan was in the band. Eric was back. Kyle was back. Greg, I think, was still out. But like Eric and Kyle had like become friends. Maybe because of the original jam things. I think they actually might have met because of me. That's funny. And then whatever fucking drummer we could find, right? And this is like in this group chat, and I'm like churning out all the demos that became Technotheism, and I would like put them out there, and nobody would just say anything ever. And at one point, I sent them soliloquy, and I was like, "This is the direction of the band," and they're like, I mean, like, okay, fine, understood. But even still, I would send these songs, I'd ask for feedback, nothing would happen, and so I'm just like, okay, fine, fuck it. Here's your parts. And then they wouldn't learn them, and then they would do other shit, and it's like, no, that's not your parts. And the thing is, Logan was inherently, especially compared to the other two, was very quiet and very reserved. So I didn't really even know how good at guitar he was until I like finally got Eric out of there and like forced him to do the stuff. And I realized like, oh yeah, holy shit. Like Logan was in the band when we did Corrupt, but I recorded it. Which is so weird to think about now. Because those songs were like pretty tough for me. And like Logan was there. He was in the roster. I just like I think it was just because I had this group. I wasn't thinking of like, I was just thinking of it as like a group of people, and none of them were responsive to what I was doing. So I was like, okay, fine, fuck it. I'm just going to do all this shit myself again. So those demos continued to exist, and I kind of started getting them prepared for recording, and then Danny sort of disappeared. And at the same time, I mean, she was going through shit. I don't blame her for that. I know she was going through shit. I dropped out of school. I moved back home. And I just couldn't get these fucking songs done. You know, I remember there was one song that Eric had demoed a part that I actually liked, but then I ended up just saying, hey, like this isn't working. There was a whole thing with Kyle leaving the band that I won't get into. And then later on, I was like, yeah, no, sorry. Like the creative differences with Eric was no. I mean, he's a ridiculously like guitar player, but it just wouldn't work. I would say, here's the parts that you need to solo on, and then he would just not do those parts and then solo over other parts that had stuff, and it was like, no. But I took some of his parts to a session guitarist, and the session guitarist straight up was like, all the rhythm stuff is going to be fine. That lead work, no, I straight up can't fucking do that. I'm like, oh, so Eric's like that good. Okay, interesting. Yeah. So I kind of backburnered it for a while, and I do remember eventually we started churning through, like once it clicked for me that Logan is a very good guitar player, we started working through Technotheism stuff. But as we were doing that, this is where it gets a little blurry, because like I also like don't have a lot of good memory retention, because of like I just don't remember shit because of undealt with emotional trauma. We wrote Acolytes. No, sorry. Oh my God. We wrote Disciples of the Void. Okay. I might have told this story before. Again, timeline is fuzzy. We wrote Disciples of the Void, and it got like significant traction. And the goal then was like, okay, nobody gives a shit about Design Abstract because Corrupted really bad, and like we spent so much time and money on the Technophage music video, and like it just didn't do well. Like people kind of just didn't give a shit, and so it's like, okay, this is niche and weird, and we get it. And Disciples of the Void had like really good feedback from people, so that's going to be our main project. And I just archived Technotheism. I was just like, meh. And at some point, there was also, you know what? I think it was at some point Logan had demoed. So I showed Logan Septic Flesh, and he had demoed this song, which became Ordo Ab Chao. And that song was so fucking good. I was like, hey, look, nobody gives a shit about this band, but like, I'm going to put this out. And then we ended up scraping together enough songs to make that an EP that became Esoteric. But I'm pretty sure that that was just like a hairline away from everything just being cut just because Ordo Ab Chao, like I wanted people to hear that because it was so cool. But we were focusing on what is now Ethereal Void at the time. We were banking on that being the big one. So at this point, COVID had started. Okay. And at this point, Technotheism had been scrapped once when I had the full band, and then everyone just sort of left, and I was like, fuck this, or more accurately, kind of the band broke up, and I was like, hey, fuck this. And I worked on other things. I was working on Soliloquy. And then it got scrapped again when I later on didn't hear from Danny after I basically kicked out everyone. And for a while, we were just practicing, just me, Logan, and Danny, and that was it. And then we had Michael for a bit, and then we didn't have Michael, and it was just the three of us. And we were still practicing. We still had band practices. And Christina sometimes. Christina occasionally, until she got in a car accident coming to band practice because this band is cursed. And so once I didn't hear from Danny long enough, scrapped again. And we were working on Ethereal Void stuff. And then when this idea for Esoteric came out, at this point, I think we'd done the Long Earth thing, and it was like, hey, do you want to just do vocals for this EP? And if it works out, you can do vocals for Technotheism. Now, it might have been the other way around. It might have been that I wanted Alex to do the vocals for Technotheism, but I wanted to get Esoteric done first. Again, I don't remember. It was rough, because then partway through that, me and her broke up. And so it was scrapped or archived again. So when I finally revived Technotheism for the last time, at this point I had even switched operating systems. So like just before the start of COVID, I switched. No, it was after. Because during COVID, I bought a brand spanking new iMac, and it was just a piece of shit fuck garbage. It was fucking awful, piece of stupid fucking shit. And I was so fucking mad that I switched to Windows, into Studio One, which is fine, except for the fact that all of the old Technotheism project files were obviously in Logic. And of course, years of being come up, being worked on, being whatever. So that album was just like a mess of random shit. Some of the stuff, the tracks were frozen in Logic, but I didn't have the plugins anymore. So it was basically like, okay, these are just printed, and you can either redo all of them or you can just deal with the audio how it is. So you got something like Data Shield Attack. The drums were printed, and that, if you look at the tempo map, it was like, it has all these like ramps and curves and stuff. Literally impossible to recreate, to have it come back on the downbeat in a way that wouldn't just fuck it up. So that song, the drums were just printed in that song, and like they're gonna sound different because of that. Same with like the orchestra, because my workflow at the time was just pure chaos. So if I had like a section of orchestra and my computer started lagging out, I would just be like, am I gonna change this? No. And I just render it down as audio, which means when I dug it back up to actually mix the thing, every time I confronted that, it was either, okay, am I going to painstakingly recreate this from scratch, or am I just going to deal with what I have? And so that album logistically was a nightmare. It sounds bad, but I'm surprised it doesn't sound worse just because of that. So, and then I talked about in the last video, Danny had demoed some of the vocals. She might have even had final takes for some of the vocals. I'm not even sure, because it spans so long. Like, this started in 2017 and now we're pushing into 2020. Like, fucking Christ. That's a long time, especially for us, especially for songs that are like, okay, like they're not that good. I hadn't really, like, my mixing wasn't that great, and my mastering was even worse. But it was literally just like recovering found audio files or like painstakingly recreating this shit. And then yeah, I also realized, okay, Alex's voice sounded good for Esoteric. For this big, massive, multi-layered, fucking bombastic release that is Technotheism, not so much, because it's not like rough, it's not harsh, it's not noisy, relatively speaking. It needs a shit ton of layers. I was going for Scar Symmetry. I was always going for Scar Symmetry. And so I decided to tackle that. And the initial me demoing Apotheosis, like, I don't think the people I sent it to were like, you know, but it was like, it was passable. And I do have a theory that like Technotheism did pretty well. And I think one of the reasons is because having a female vocalist just automatically makes it gothic metal, especially when it's symphonic. Like, if you've got the symphonic shit and then you've also got a girl singer, it's just gothic. Even if it's not, even if there's no trace of gothic influence, it's gothic metal because people are fucking idiots, and that's all there is to it. Whereas when you have a dude doing mixed vocals, then you're thinking of Soilwork, and hopefully you're thinking of Scar Symmetry, or maybe you're even thinking of metalcore, but you're definitely not thinking of Epica, or Within Temptation, or Nightwish, or Evanescence. Like, you're just not. It's a different vibe, even though it really isn't, even though it's just one small element of this massive, multifaceted project. That's how people's brains work. And I think a whole bunch of people are more interested in this up-and-coming sort of techie melodeath thing than they would be about the exact same techie symphonic album if it's like, oh, but it's like it's got girls in it. Like, I honestly think that if I had went ahead and used Danny's or Alex's vocals in Technotheism, it wouldn't have done as well, even though they're both better singers than me, at very least at what they do. I do believe that, and maybe it's shitty, and maybe I'm wrong. We'll never know, but that really seemed like the vibe. Some people have reached out and said how much they like so-and-so vocalist. I've heard it about Nina and about Alex. I mean, Danny, obviously, like, Danny is an amazing singer, and Corrupt was not a good album, especially for vocals. I wrote Corrupt with my vocals in mind, because at that point I didn't have a singer and I just expected to do it, even though I like wasn't good at singing, right? And so all of those clean parts were like retcon for her to do it, and like they're not in her range and they're not written by her. So like, it sucks that that's kind of her mark in the band. Like, she also did the Emanate re-release. That's fine. But like, Nina also wasn't a bad singer. Like, Nina's voice fit it really well. So Danny kind of didn't get a fair shake in the band. But yeah, she's awesome. Like, no shade for Danny. Was really cursed and everyone left. And then later on, a bunch of people came back and there were some different people, and we were making Technotheism, and everyone left, though this time a lot of it was me doing the firing. But between that and like the fucked up workflow and having to just like revive dead Logic files on like a computer that I wasn't used, like, it was just like an ancient, I'm pretty sure when I was pulling the files off of that computer, it was like my 2008 Mac Pro, which wasn't even the computer that it was made on. So this is the thing, is I got a MacBook in university, and that's what I did most of the Technotheism stuff on. And I'm pretty sure that MacBook was sold or otherwise gone. And then I opened those Logic files on an ancient Mac Pro that didn't have any of those plugins. Again, so if I just could pull the raw audio files, or if the tracks were frozen, then great. But like, those plugins didn't exist. And similarly, any of the signal chains, like third-party plugins, weren't there. So even if I had them sounding exactly the way I wanted, unless I used only Logic plugins on those tracks, they wouldn't sound that way anyway. They were still going to be fucked. And so I had to recreate it to the best of my ability in Studio One for every song, which was super, super fucked. And it was really bad. And then combined with, like, it seemed like nobody wanted to sing for it. And that was the other thing. We all know that the bridge in Deus Est is Vocaloid. If you don't know that, you do now. It's Vocaloid. That's not a real person. I asked several people to feature in that. And all of them said no. And then the album came out, and then multiple of them asked why I didn't ask them to feature in it. And I had to tell them I literally did. It was just a demo back then, and it didn't sound good, and now it sounds good and has Spotify plays, so now you're wondering why your voice isn't on it. And yeah, I'm a little salty about that. I feel like if you're in the industry, you should be able to listen to a demo and know where it's going to go. If you're saying no to a track because it sounds shitty because it's literally a demo, like, I'm not going to spruce up my fucking demo recordings just to impress you. If you're in the industry, you should know what it's going to sound like. That was also cursed and stupid. There's a lot of cursed and stupid shit with this. Yeah, Metamtechnosis was surprisingly uncursed, and Transhuman Ascendant even less so. So that's good. Maybe the band is getting less cursed, hopefully. It almost seems like I was supposed to be doing the vocals for it because everything went a lot smoother. Everything generally goes a lot smoother when it's just me and Logan. So, yeah. I'm not going to say that the band isn't cursed because you know what was cursed? How Transhuman Ascendant lost us a whole fuck ton of money. But that's not the band's fault. That's the label's fault. That sucked and was stupid. Anyway, so yeah, the curse of the Design Abstract, Emanate, Technotheism, both cursed albums for different reasons. Technotheism, I mean, it has a little bit of a legacy. It has a micro legacy. I'm okay with that. Emanate, I wish never existed. I think it's bad. I went through the songs the other day because I was showing someone, or I was like looking for a specific idea, and like, wow, it's bad. The writing is bad. The writing is so bad that it makes the production bad, because I thought the production was good because like Nick did it, and like he's good and the production is fine, but the writing actually makes the production a lot worse, and the production could have been better as far as dealing with the orchestral instruments. Nick does like hardcore and punk and metal and stuff, and like he has not worked with that type of shit before, and I don't blame him for it. And in retrospect, what I should have done and what I would do is just print down all the orchestral shit and just give it in one track. I didn't know that then. I sent him every single individual piece. So what I should have done is just printed it all down the way it should have been and just sent it to him, and then just kept telling him to turn it the fuck up, because like the drums are so loud in that album, and whatever, it's fine because yeah, he's a drummer. Not a big deal, but like that album fucking sucks, and some people like it, and sure, it could just be partially like it's just my bias because that was such a negative, terrible time in my life. Like it was the best and worst part of my life, because like the fact that I was doing music, like I would spend all my days doing music or in school for music, and then on my off days I was going to the studio to record music. You know, that was fucking amazing. That was great. But of course, like I was going through a horribly traumatic breakup. I was ending a relationship of 8 years, and not to mention the person was the singer for the album who then refused to do it. So this is like my entire life's work right now, and it's just like, no, I'm not gonna fucking finish it. Yeah, it was rough. And what all this has taught me, what the lesson that I have been taught over and over by the universe, is to be self-sufficient, obviously. Because even in the super, super early days, like when I was still demoing out Emanate, I went to a guitarist for Event Horizon, and he's like, I can't play this. Like, because the counting's super weird. Amazing guitar player. But for him, he had the technicality, but he didn't have like the math. That shit was like super mathy back then, and so I had to learn how to do it. And he was really supportive. He's the one who like taught me all the basic shit. He's the reason I got a Tube Screamer, like the original Maxon Tube Screamer, and the fucking 5150 Marshall cab. Like all of my gear taste is just his gear taste. That's the guitarist / singer for what is now Adapt to Survive. Before that was Within the Wreckage, Evil's New Era. That dude, great guy. He taught me a lot about guitar production. But I took one of those early Emanate demos to him, and he's just like, no, like it's too weird. The counting is too like fucked up, and I was like, okay, fair. So he gave me the tools to learn how to do it myself. And then I find that just repeated itself over and over throughout this shit when I try to get other people involved in this project, and it's just like it just doesn't work, and it just ends up that I need to do it. Like I ended up recording almost everything in Emanate myself, even though I had a full band. I was just supposed to do vocals on that album. Not even that. I was just supposed to only do screams. That was it. My job for Emanate going into the studio was vocals. When I left, I had recorded the majority of the album on drums, all of the rhythm guitars, all of the bass except for one song. Yeah. That didn't quite happen with Technotheism. I mean, it did with the vocals anyway. It was kind of a different thing because, like, again, Danny, no shade, Danny's amazing. But I couldn't rely on her to like do the songs. I never knew when I was going to get the songs, when we could schedule it. There were some songs where it's like, oh, okay, like, have you learned this one yet? Like, no. And it's been months. And at this point it's like, okay, it's been 6 months and we haven't recorded anything. Like, you know, and so it pushed me to be able to be good enough to do it myself, which is good. That's inherently positive. But it's a lesson that I keep having to learn, is that I have to be self-sufficient in this stuff. The exception seems to be Logan. The exception is always Logan. For some reason, we just work really well together, and he can tolerate my bullshit and my like the fact that I want it to be a certain way, but I can't do it. Unlike when I have a drummer and it's just like, I want you to do this. Well, I can't do that. Well, I can, so fuck you. On guitar, I can't. There was a time when, like, I don't want to say that our technicality was matched because it never would be. Like, Logan is always way more tight of a player than me, but there was a point where we could at least switch off. Again, Disciples of the Void, I played half the guitars on that, and he played the other half, and we would switch off. He would write and I would record, I would write and he would record, kind of back and forth. Obviously his playing has a much different feel, but at the time I was making those choices based on feel because I had at least enough technicality that it's like, okay, if I play this, it's going to feel this way, and if you play this, it's going to feel a different way. Whereas now, obviously, I can't touch anything that's happening, like, at all. I've never really even tried to play any of God's. I'm sure I didn't try to play much of Transhuman, and I fucking sure as hell am not trying to play any of the new stuff. Like, hell no. That's why I gave up doing bass. It's just too technical. I just can't do it anymore. So the exception seems to be Logan, which is nice. But the lesson remains to be self-sufficient. That's the reason I learned production too, because like I went to someone who was good, but didn't quite get it, and it was just like over and over, no, it needs to be this way, no, it needs to be this way. And it's at a point where it's like, why am I using words to try to make him do the music the way I want it to when I can just take a bit of time and learn how to do it better myself? And that's why Corrupt was done. Well, Emanate was obviously done in like a real studio. Corrupt was done in like a just started out home studio for like a lot cheaper, and like, to be fair, it's much more close to the vibe. And like, was Technotheism better sounding than that? Like, no. I doubt it. I've never compared them, but I doubt it. However, like, was Transhuman Ascendant better? Probably. I would bet that Transhuman Ascendant sounds better than Corrupt production wise, because I just had to learn to do it myself, because it's just, I so rarely see eye to eye with people. It sucks, but it doesn't. It's nice to be like self-sufficient like that. So yeah. And I don't think that the curse is anything other than me being difficult to deal with. And so if I am going to be difficult to deal with, then I better be able to back it up. And I can, except with guitars, which I'm just ever grateful for Logan. I mean, even if Logan told me to fuck off, this music would still exist. The guitars would just be different. They would sound a lot different. It wouldn't sound like Emanate. It would sound like, I don't know, what metal have I made? It would just be different. Like, I wrote a lot of the guitars for the new album, but I can't play them. I would just speed them up to something that's more Logan's tempo. So really, like, if I played guitars, it would just be a slower version of what's to come. Like, for for Constructs. I really hope I can put that album, or at least like the demo soon, so you can hear what the fuck I'm talking about, because it's so good. Anyway, I think I've run out of steam. So yeah, the Curse of the Design Abstract, the Curse of Emanate, Curse of Technotheism. It's just some cursed shit up in here, but it taught me to be self-sufficient, so that's good. That's the moral of the story. Yeah.